Operation. Tunnel ventilation has proven to be the most cost-effective way of keeping birds cool during hot weather. The combination of high air exchange rates, uniform high air speeds, as well as the use of evaporative cooling pads has proven time and time again to be able to keep the birds cool in the most hottest of climates. Now, inlet ventilation, great for cooler times of the year. But the problem is it does not provide the level of air exchange or air movement over the birds that tunnel ventilation does. Curtain ventilation with circulation fans does a good job during mild weather, but when it gets really hot and humid, it doesn't provide the level of air movement over those birds that we need to keep them cool. The fact is, circulation fans only provide a level of air movement over very few birds in the house. You look at this house, lots of fans, but when you take a thermal image of it, you see that maybe only 30% of the birds actually have a high level of air movement over, pulling the heat off their bodies. So in order to get maximum bird performance from our tunnel ventilated houses, they need to be designed and operated correctly. And that's what we'll hope to do in the next hour, is taking a brief look at the design and operation of a tunnel ventilated house. First question, how many tunnel fans are required to properly ventilate a tunnel ventilated house? The number of tunnel fans a house requires depends on two criteria. Number one, air exchange. Get the heat out of the house. Number two is airspeed. Let's get the heat out of the birds. I got to get the heat out of the birds in order to get the heat out of the house. Now, air exchange. The air in a poultry house is being heated by the heat entering through the ceiling, the side walls, the end walls, the lower side walls, the curtains, and the birds. To keep the house temperature uniform from end to end, we need to rapidly exchange the air inside the house with fresh air from outside the house. If we don't exchange it rapidly enough, we're going to have big temperature differences between the inlet and the exhaust fan of the house. Our goal is to install a sufficient tunnel fan capacity to maintain a maximum temperature difference of 2.5 degrees C with market-age birds on the hottest day of the year. That's the goal. To accomplish this goal, a properly insulated grower house should have a minimum tunnel fan capacity between 165 and 210 cubic meters per hour per square meter of floor space. That's our starting point. It's a general guideline. But because we have so many different countries here and so many different climates, I thought I'd share with you a little bit more scientific way of figuring out how many fans a house is supposed to have, and that's through our Excel spreadsheet that you all can get. So that we published it probably 20 years ago. We keep on updating it. Basically, in this spreadsheet, you put specific information related to your climate and your house. The weather, the house dimensions, the ceiling construction, sidewall construction, house insulation, bird numbers, size, and lighting system information. So the quickest way to understand what this thing is doing, let's look at an example. We have a modern 18 meter by 150 meter broiler house. We're going to first put in the local conditions. We're going to put them in English units, the green value, and the spreadsheet will convert them to metric units. So first, we put in our design temperature of 85 degrees to 30 degrees C. We want to design this house so on the hottest day of the year, that the hottest the house gets is 30 degrees C. You go, well, that's hot. No, not if we have the right airspeed. 30 degrees C, airspeed of 3 meters per second, 4 meters per second, birds are fine. And we're going to put in our outside temperature, whatever you want. I just put it in 100 degrees or about 38 degrees Celsius. We'll also have to put in the attic temperature, which I'll explain in a moment. Because we have to look at the difference between an open ceiling house and a drop ceiling house. We're going to put in the overall dimensions, 500 feet or 152 meters by 18 meters wide. We're going to put in the peak ceiling height, how tall the ceiling is. We're going to put in our sidewall height And we're going to put in open or drop ceiling. Again, open ceiling means it goes insulation, then metal. Drop ceiling means there's this attic space. There's a space between the ceiling and the roof. And it does some things differently based on that. We're going to put in information like the number of birds, the bird weight, that's the maximum bird weight you're going to have in that house. You're also going to put in the amount of heat production. Where do you get that number from? You get it from this table. The interesting thing is, the younger the bird, the more heat it produces per pound because it's growing faster. Keep that in mind. Faster a bird grows, the more heat it's going to produce. We also can look at different types of house. I can use this to design a pullet house, a breeder house, and even a layer house with some slight modifications. We're going to talk about our sidewall construction next. We're going to say this one is a totally enclosed house, so we put in a curtain height of 0. It's going to look something like this one here. We have an insulated wall and some concrete. We're going to put those dimensions in right there. Now, if it was a curtain house, we would change it a little bit because we know curtain houses are going to be different because there's going to be a lot more heat coming into that curtain than there is an insulated wall. So, let's say it looked like this middle one. We put in our curtain height, we put in the area above and below the curtain, put it all in there again in feet, it'll convert it to metric. We're going to put information in about our lighting system because light produces heat. So we're going to put in 100 bulbs that are 10 watts apiece. 20% of that is going to be used to light the house, 80% of it's going to be used to heat the house because light produces heat. We're going to put in insulation values. How resistive is that wall or is that ceiling to heat flow? Here's a level of different levels of ceiling insulation. These have minimal ceiling insulation. You see, the whole ceiling is just glowing. That means we have a lot of heat coming through. It means that there's a very little resistance to heat flow. That's what it's supposed to look like. The only hot thing should be the birds. With the walls and ceilings properly insulated, that means the only heat we need to get rid of is the heat being produced by the birds. We minimize the effect of what's happening outside that house. So we're going to put in different insulation values in that whole thing. We're going to put in how much air the fans we're going to put in moves. So let's say in this case they move about 42,000 cubic meters per hour. We're going to put that in there because it's going to tell us how many fans we need. So results, after you put all that in, you find out what your total poultry house heat load. 1.4 million BTUs of heat is in that house that we have to get rid of. Because if we don't get rid of that heat, that house will overheat and will cook our birds. How much heat is that? That's the same amount of heat as burning 60 liters of gasoline every hour. 60 liters of gasoline every hour is the heat that we have to get rid of. But where's that heat coming from? In this case, 10% is coming from the ceiling, the lights is 0.2%, the end wall is 0.1%, the sidewall is 0.8%, foundation 0.5%. We're missing a lot of numbers there. That's because it's the birds. In a well-insulated house, 90% of the heat we're trying to get rid of is not coming from outside, it's coming from inside. And where is it coming from? Inside the birds. That's why we need airspeed. Because we have to have enough airspeed to pull that heat out of the birds and out of the house. So, how much tunnel fan capacity we need to get rid of it? Boom, we find out right here. That's our heat production. Watts, BTUs. That's how much fan capacity is, CFM, cubic meters per hour. And it tells us that we need 11 fans. With 11 fans, we know on the hottest day of the year with the biggest birds, there's only going to be about a 2.8, 2.5 degree temperature rise. It also gives us some other information about how much heat load we have per square foot or per square meter. But right there is the number. How much airspeed will we get? That's enough fan capacity to get the heat out of the house. But is it enough fan capacity to generate enough airspeed to get the heat out of the birds? The spreadsheet tells us. We're going to get an airspeed of 1.292 meters per second. That's sort of low, isn't it? What is the right airspeed? Remember, we have two targets. We have to get the heat out of the house, but we have to get it out of the heat, out of the birds. And is 1.9 meters per second enough airspeed to get the heat out of the birds? Now, for a tunnel ventilated house, the target airspeed ranges between 2 and 4 meters per second. The exact airspeed that you need is going to depend on a variety of factors. Number one, the type of bird grown. The more kilograms per square meter you have in that house, the more airspeed you're going to need. So what you see is your highest airspeeds are going to tend to be your broilers. Your lowest airspeeds will tend to be pullets, breeder pullets. Low kilograms per square meter, low heat production. Breeders fall somewhere between the two of those. Climate has a big factor on the amount of airspeed we need. What will be the temperature of the incoming air? Because the fact is, the effectiveness of airspeed to cool our birds decreases as air temperature increases. If it's 28 degrees C or lower, airspeed is great at sucking heat off those birds. 28 to 31, it's pretty good. 32 degrees and hotter, it doesn't do much because there's not enough of a temperature difference between the air and the birds. So during hot weather, we need to decrease the incoming air temperature by using evaporative cooling pads to maximize that bird cooling. Our goal is to keep the temperature around 30 degrees or lower. That's the goal. Now, how effective are evaporative cooling pads at reducing temperature of the air? Depends on the climate. Is the climate hot and humid, hot and dry, or moderate? A hot and dry climate, evaporative cooling has a high cooling potential. The best place to grow chickens, if you get the water, is a hot and dry area because we can cool that air. Let's look at an example. This is hourly weather data. Every single hour, a dot represents a temperature and humidity over a 9-year period. So whenever the temperature is above 87 degrees, I have a data point of every single hour of what the combination of temperature and humidity is. And you can see there, this is a hot, dry climate. All of our data points are down here below pretty much 40% humidity. Hot and dry. So let's look at in general. We're looking at 39 degrees, about 20% humidity. How good of a job will our pads do? We have a chart for that. There it is. Right in there, what does it tell us? Our incoming air temperature will be 26 degrees. Boy, that's perfect. During the hottest weather, if I'm in California there, I can have that incoming air temperature of 26 degrees, blow air over that bird at 2, 3 meters per second. I'm great. What will be the humidity incoming air? Will it be too humid? We have another chart like that, but first let's look at the relationship. It's called evaporative cooling. The red line is the temperature, the blue line is the humidity. The evaporative cooling pads are off. We turn the evaporative cooling pads on, temperature goes down, humidity goes up. You cannot get cooling with evaporative cooling without increasing the humidity. The fact is, what you find out is for every 1 degree of cooling you get off of an evaporative cooling pad, your humidity will increase 4.5%. Keep that in mind. 1 degree cooling, 4.5% humidity. No matter where you are in the world, you cannot change that fact. You get 10 degrees cooling, it's going to be 45% more humid inside than outside. Make things simple, we have a chart looking at those 38, 39 degrees and about 20% humidity. Incoming humidity is 70%. Not bad. Yeah, we'd like 50, but 70% is not bad. Let's rearrange that chart when it comes to cooling potential. Here we have the same type of chart where we have temperature on the bottom, humidity on the right. This is the incoming air temperature at every combination of temperature and humidity. So if it's around 32 degrees and 20% humidity, the incoming air will be about 21 degrees. So let's take that graph and put that graph on top of it. Boom. There you have, for Fresno, California, every single hour, what the incoming air temperature would be. You notice we're always down below 30 degrees. We're always in a really good position. Great place to grow chickens. Incoming air temperature will probably be 25, 26, 27 degrees. Maximum 28. And the humidity be around 70%. So, for Fresno, California, 28 degrees C or lower is what we're going to see during hot weather. Humidity would be 60, 70% most of the time. Probably need an airspeed of 2 to 2.5 meters per second. So if that house that I just described was in California, we're good. But what about hot and humid climates? Hot and humid climates, the air has more moisture in it, so it's more difficult to evaporate water. Let's look at Thailand. Here's Thailand. There's Fresno. Fresno, Thailand. Boom, everything is just more humid. It's about as hot, but it's much more humid. So, during our hot weather in Thailand, we're looking at about 38 degrees, humidity right around 40, 50%. What does that mean? Our incoming air temperature will be 30 degrees. And if it goes down the house and picks up heat, it'll be 32 in the back. This is a tough climate. Humidity, 82%. We're bringing in air at 30 degrees, and the humidity will be 80%. That air is not going to be really effective at cooling the bird, so what do we have to do? Move a heck of a lot more air. Simple as that. The warmer the incoming air, the higher the airspeed we need to help cool those birds off. Little graph here showing the relationship between heat loss and airspeed. At a low airspeed, the only way a bird loses heat is through respiration. Very little is lost to the air. So at low airspeeds, 30 degrees C, the only way a bird can lose heat is through respiration. As we increase airspeed, we pull more heat off the bird with our air movement, which means the bird relies less on panting to cool itself. The more airspeed, the more heat we pull off the bird, the less it has to pant, the less important humidity is. That's the key. We got to help that bird by us pulling the heat out of the bird so it doesn't have to pant to try to cool itself because it's going to be too humid. So here we have Thailand. Incoming air temperature going to be 29, 31 degrees. Humidity will be 80%. Here, that house needs about 3.5 to 4 meters per second wind speed. How about more local conditions? House in India. Here's Nepal. This is weather for this area right here. From 2015 to 2022. Every single hour when the temperature was over 27 degrees, there you are. Not really hot here. Hottest conditions look to me about 31 degrees, about 50% humidity. Put that graph on top of this graph, and there's what you have your incoming air temperature. Right there. Not too bad. Very little 30s, couple data points up there. Most of the time, we're down in here. So we're looking in general for this climate, maybe 26, 27 degrees incoming with a humidity of about 80%. Does the 80% bother me? Not terribly, because I know I'm going to have a little bit of airspeed to cool off these birds. Sri Lanka? Look at that one. I guess I don't need to tell you all how hot and humid it is. It doesn't get extremely hot, but it's moderately hot with lots of humidity, which is actually worse than really hot and dry. So we look in there. That's our really critical point right there. Put that on that graph right there. What do you see? Most of the time, we're going to be around 30 degrees as our peak. Right in there. So we're looking at 29 to 30 degrees, 80% humidity. That is pretty hot. We need more airspeed there. India, one location in it. They were looking at our temperatures up in there. Put that one on top of that. And you see a similar trend. Not too bad, really, relatively speaking. Very few up there in the 30. Most of it's down in there. So again, we're probably looking at temperatures 29, 30 degrees, 80% humidity. A lot of these are very similar, obviously. Very similar hot and humid climates. Mumbai, lots of that. What's interesting in a lot of these climates is it's really dry or it's really humid. You have two seasons, obviously, rainy and dry. You can sort of see it with the weather data. Up in here, we're looking at the warm, humid weather. Put that on there. We can start to see, there's our data point. Again, we're looking at 29 to 31 degrees. Most of what we see in these climates, they're hot and humid. And that means what? You're going to need a lot of airspeed in these types of climates. Pakistan gets really hot. Look at those data points right there. Put that on top of that. This one's actually a lot worse than the others. You see, we have a lot up here in 31 degrees. Obviously, some really hot weather. So in this, up in there, we're looking at 29 to 31 degrees C. This is probably the worst climate that I can see based on that weather data. But they're all sort of similar. They all are hot. They are portions of the year they're hot and humid. So climate's going to play a role. Size and age of bird. The older the bird, the better feather, the better insulated that bird is. We can actually measure the insulation value of the feathers. And after they get up to about 4 weeks of age, that insulation value really takes off, which means they're harder to cool. Plus, they have less surface area per kilogram of weight. So the older the bird, the higher the wind speed required. Density, that's really what it's all about. Climate and density are your two biggest determining factors of airspeed. In order to maximize bird cooling, we need to get air movement over all the bird surfaces. When they're all packed together, they're very hard to cool, which means we need even more airspeed to try to cool them. Because air movement's only effective if there's space between the birds. I can get air over its back, its sides, underneath it. But if they're all packed together like that, I'm only going to get airspeed over their backs, which is maybe only 25% of their body. Which means I'm only cooling off 25% of their body. Look at some pictures. This is the same house. 29 degrees, 2.25 meters per second. This is at the fan end. This is the middle of the house. This is up next to the cool cells. The hottest place for the birds was the front of the house. Even though the air was cooler up there, because it's closer to the evaporative cooling pads, the birds were hotter because I couldn't pull the heat off the birds because they're too close together. Let's look at some research we've done. Here's some birds, and we're looking at the effect of density on heat stress. So we have these two pens of birds, two different densities. 50-day-old birds, we're growing some big birds in the U.S., 23 degrees C, no air movement. I think we'd all agree 23 degrees C is not hot. It's pretty decent temperature, but there's no air blowing over those birds. 5.5 birds per square meter versus 11 birds per square meter. We implanted temperature sensors in the birds. What's the best way to know if a bird is heat stressed? Measure its temperature. So we put data loggers in these birds that measure their temperature every minute for the whole study period. Here are the body temperatures for the birds at 5.5 square meters. About 41 degrees, which is pretty much normal. 5.5 birds per square meter. Here they are, 11 birds per square meter. Just by changing the density to 11 birds per square meter, boom, their body temperatures are up. They were borderline heat stressed. The temperature was fine, 23 degrees. Why are you hot? Because they're all packed together, and that's what you have to watch out for. The study was expanded. We took the room temperature, varied between 12 and 32 degrees C over a 10-day period. We did 4 kilograms per square meter, 19, 30, and 38 kilograms per square meter. They're all in the same room. We weren't blowing air over them. We're just trying to see what it looks like in still air. Here's 4 kilograms per square meter. That's every single body temperature that we recorded as room temperature varied between 14 and about 32 degrees. The hotter it gets, the more body temperature went up. Increase the density, goes up more. Increase the density again, goes up more. Increase the density again, goes up even more. Simplifying the graphs, there's 4 kilograms per square meter. Let's put normal temperatures over there. Ideal body temperature between 40.5 and 41.5. Marginal, you get them up to 43, above 43 degrees, they're heat stressed. So when they're growing at 4 kilograms per square meter, even at 34 degrees, they weren't heat stressed. Density was fine. Increase the density to 19. They became heat stressed at about 31. Increase the density to 30 kilograms per square meter. They became heat stressed at 28 degrees. Increase it again to 38 degrees. They became heat stressed at 26 degrees. All these birds, what really affected their heat stress was their density. And the higher the density, the more likely they are going to become heat stressed, the more airspeed we need. So let's combine all that data into this graph right there. Density versus body temperature at 27 degrees. And it really shows you the picture. If you want to do very little to your houses, I don't want many fans, I want a naturally ventilated house, I don't need much, fine. Grow your birds at these low densities. But the higher the density you want to do, the more airspeed you're going to need because they're more heat stressed. And that's the biggest reason people build environmentally controlled houses, so they can put more kilograms per square meter in each house. I can build fewer houses and get performance. I can get performance with an environmental house. I mean, a current house, I just can't put too many birds in it. So air velocity guidelines. Most broiler house, 2.5 is considered minimum. 4 meters per second is really the maximum airspeed we'd ever really need. The primary factors that determine airspeed are density and climate. Those are the two things. Bird size really doesn't matter. It's how many kilos per square meter you have in that house. So for a high density, hot and humid climate, you're looking at a minimum of 3 meters per second. Ideally, it's going to be 4 meters per second is what you'd be targeting. So right now, our airspeed is too low for your climates. We're only at 1.92. So that fan capacity, the house is uniform, but we don't have enough airspeed to get the heat out of the birds. So what we can do in the spreadsheet is change this value, put more CFM in, and we can come up with higher airspeeds. Just keep on putting fans in there, and you'll come up with what's the appropriate one to get your airspeed where you need it to be. How much pad area will be required? We typically use a 6-inch pad, 45-15, and the spreadsheet will tell you how much pad area you need. Calculate it for you. We need about 93 square meters. If the pad is 1.5 meters tall, we need 61 meters of it, 30 on each side. If the pad is 1.8 meters, we need about 51 meters, about 25, 26 meters on each side of the house. How many sidewall inlets a house should have? A tunnel house needs 2 ventilation systems. You need the tunnel for when it's warmer, but you need the inlets when you have smaller birds or colder time of the year. There's 2 different things. Tunnel is really good at hot weather. Trying to minimum ventilate a house during cold weather with tunnel ventilation is a disaster. You're going to have a really cold end and a really hot end. So all houses are supposed to have inlets for cooler weather and tunnel ventilation for hotter weather. The exception could be breeder houses if you don't get really cold. So how many inlets should this house have? The greater amount of inlet capacity, the more fans you can run through your inlets, and the smoother the transition you'll have between sidewall inlets and tunnel ventilation. Right here, what we typically want to do is to run about 60% of our tunnel fan capacity through our inlets. And then we have to put in how big the inlet we want to put in. So let's say we're going to use something like this. Put in the dimensions, and it tells you how many inlets. There it is. Where do I have to install my fans? Should I install the fans in the sidewall or the roof? You can use sidewall fans, you can use tunnel fans, you can use a combination of the two. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter. Where your fans are is a tweak. What's important is having the inlets in there, the right kind of inlet, and the right spacing, which I'll talk more about tomorrow. But the fact is, we're going to need an inlet system. Now, the other thing we're going to need is a good fan. Because the tunnel fan is the engine of that house. And if we don't have a good engine, we're not going to be able to cool those birds. Because again, it's the tunnel fan that determines your ability to cool birds, but just important, it will determine how much it costs to operate that house. 9 times out of 10, the cheapest fan you can buy is going to use twice the energy of a good fan. So look at the money I'm saving. That fan is only $500 US. Great, it's going to use twice the electricity. So we want a fan that moves the air and that's energy efficient. We want to know the air moving capacity of that maximum expected static pressure. What is the maximum pressure we're going to see? The pressure is determined by airspeed. I have to talk an hour about this. But for right now, what you need to know is the higher your target airspeed, the harder it is for those fans to pull the air, which means the higher the pressure we're going to have. So if you have a nice, hot, humid climate and we want an airspeed of 3.5 to 4 meters per second, those fans are going to be operating between a pressure between 40 and 50 pascals. So when you're figuring out how many fans you need to get the right airspeed, you have to look at their air moving capacity at 40 to 50 pascals. I can't change the fact that high airspeeds equal high pressures. We also want a fan that has a good energy efficiency rating. Ratings are typically range between 25 and 50 cubic meters per hour per watt. It's sort of like miles per gallon, miles per liter, or kilometers per liter. The higher the number, the more energy efficient the fan is. You need to know what the energy efficiency rating of your fan is. We'd like to know what it is for our cars. We need to know what it is for our fans, because we're going to spend a lot more money running those fans than you are going to be operating those the car. Minimum rating is around 32.3 cubic meters per hour. That is minimum. A good rating is about 21 CFM per watt, or 35.5 cubic meters per hour per watt. And an ideal rating is usually about 37 cubic meters per hour per watt or greater. How do I determine what a fan moves? And its energy efficiency rating. You only buy fans that have been tested by an independent lab. Never trust a salesman. Love salesmen, but never trust them. Or trust them but verify it. And how do we do that? We use this website right here. They have more tunnel fans. They got hundreds of tunnel fans manufactured around the world. That's the University of Illinois, and they test fans. They test tunnel fans, and they give us good data. Here's their website. You can put in the manufacturer of the fan, the size, the airflow, energy efficiency rating, and it will give you the information. So let's say we select some fans. It says all the fans that are manufactured by Acme that move at least 25,000 CFM, boom, they are. Then we can test on, we can get the whole test results of that fan. Here's all the information you need. You have airflow at the different pressures, both in English and metric units. We have amps, volts, watts, cubic meters per hour per watt. That's the information. Never, ever buy a fan that hasn't been tested by some independent laboratory. Because again, nothing's worse than having a house that has a really poor performing engine or that has an engine that uses way too much fuel. So, tunnel operation in 25 minutes or less. Tunnel ventilation operation. First, we start off by using sidewall inlets with sidewall or tunnel fans. Whatever you want to do, I don't care. All I really want to make sure is I have those inlets in the house. Then we transition to tunnel ventilation when the birds start to get warm. How many fans should I be operating through my sidewall inlets prior to going to tunnel ventilation? In general, by the time the house temperature is about 2.5 to 3.5 degrees C above the target temperature, we should be operating about 70 to 110 cubic meters per hour through our sidewall inlets, which is about 50 to 60% of your tunnel fan capacity. So in general, by the time the house temperature is 2 to 3.5 degrees above our target, we should be running about half of our tunnel fan capacity through our inlets. That's not tunnel ventilation. That is sidewall inlet ventilation using our tunnel fans. The birds aren't hot. It's only 2 to 3.5 degrees above our target. So let's look at an example. A house with 9 tunnel ventilation fans. Let's say our target is 20 degrees, 20.5. We're running 2 fans. It gets up to 21.5 degrees, we're running 3 fans. Get up to 22 degrees, we're running 4 fans. Look at it another way. Here's our house, it's 20.5 degrees. We're using maybe 4 sidewall fans, or we could be using 2 tunnel fans. Whatever you want to do, that is fine. But what I want you to see, it's like a car shifting gears. The warmer it gets, the more fans we turn on. So at 20.5 degrees, we're using maybe 2 tunnel fans. 21.5, 3 tunnel fans. 22 degrees C, 4 tunnel fans. 4, 5, whatever. We're at about half of our tunnel fan capacity, and we're about that 3 degrees above our target. When should tunnel ventilation be used? Tunnel ventilation is for cooling. If the birds are hot, you should be using it regardless of bird age. If they're not, you should be using sidewall inlets. It's pretty simple. If the birds are cool, comfortable, inlets, tunnel. If they're hot. But in general, we should be switching from inlet mode to tunnel ventilation mode about 2.5 to 4 degrees above the target temperature. So again, we're going to be switching from inlets into tunnel at about 2.5 to 4 degrees. It's easier to look at. This is what it looks like. So we're still going to be using 4 fans, but we're going to use 4 fans, go to tunnel with the same 4 tunnel fans. We're switching from inlets into tunnel. So now we're using our inlets, 4 fans, and we're pulling our air through our tunnel inlets up there. How many tunnel fans should I use? The number of tunnel fans required can be divided into 3 phases. The first third of the flock, the second third, and the final third of the flock. There's 3 different points within a house of broilers. So the first third, we have young birds. Second third, moderate age birds. Final third, we're at the market age birds. Now, since the birds are responsible for most of the amount of heat we're trying to get rid of, the fact is our tunnel ventilation fan ventilation rate is going to vary primarily with bird age, or more specifically, kilograms per square meter. The more kilograms per square meter, the more fans we're going to have to run in that house. The point is here, you don't run every single fan on a 2-week-old bird because they don't need it. There's not enough kilograms per square meter. So again, the older they get, the more kilograms per square meter we have, the more fans we're going to use. So let's say we have a market density of 42 kilograms per square meter, which is pretty typical for a nice environmentally controlled house. This is our fan capacity required to make sure that we keep a nice uniform house temperature. At the very end, we're going to need about 170 cubic meters per hour per square meter. Remember, we talked about that before. That number right there, 165 to 210, that's about what it works out for a well-insulated house. Now, if you grew birds at a lower density, 20% lower density, we'd probably have 20% lower tunnel fan capacity. So again, you're looking at 34 kilograms per square meter. Now, we'd only be at about 140. So the maximum amount of tunnel fan capacity is going to vary with kilograms per square meter. So, for the last third of the flock, that's our operating range. 110 to 160 cubic meters per hour, and we're going to get a 2.5 degree temperature rise. During the middle third, the second third, between 55 and 110, that's our fan capacity, and we're going to get a 2.5 degree temperature rise. During the first third, very little heat production, very little kilograms per square meter, so we're going to run between 18 and 55 cubic meters per square meter, 2.5 degrees. Simpler way of looking at this, let's get it really simple here. During the last third of the flock, you're going to use every single fan because you have that much heat. During the second third, you're only going to use 66% of your tunnel fans. No more, that's it, stop. You don't need to use more. During the first third, if they get hot, we're going to tunnel them. Yes, but we're only going to be using 33% of our tunnel fans. Quick and dirty, that's all you need to remember, right there. Keep in mind, it's the density that's most important. The higher the density, that's what determines fan numbers, not necessarily how old they are. So here I am with a market density of 42 kilograms per square meter, 56 days on a big bird. But if I was growing a small bird, but I still had 42 kilograms at 42 days, I still have a lot of fans that last third. The third depends upon the flock, not the age. Because I can heat stress a bunch of small birds if they're at a high density. So just think of it in terms of where I am in the flock. If you have a 32-day flock, then the last 2 weeks or week and a half is your last third. Now, the question is, what about airspeed? That keeps my temperature uniform, but will I get enough airspeed to be able to cool those birds? I have to do both the air exchange and the airspeed. So, here we are, 30-degree C room, low airspeed, high airspeed. All I did was change the amount of airspeed in the house. So, as the big birds get older, we have to make sure we're running enough fans to get the heat out of the house, but we also have to make sure we're running enough fans to get the heat out of the birds, to get the airspeed we're looking for. So let's talk briefly about airspeed and bird age. What's our target? Young birds, the first third of the flock, poorly feathered, lots of space between them, not a lot of airspeed. That second third, moderate feathered, moderate to free space, a little bit more airspeed. The last third, well feathered, minimal space between the birds, we're going to need a lot of airspeed right there. So low, moderate, and high. So, precisely how much airspeed is required at each production phase? Now that's the hard part, is determining exactly how much airspeed you need. But here are some general guidelines. Let's look at these birds right here. These were in China. They're young. They're heat stressed. And we went in, this is a tunnel house. And I went in there and said, your birds are hot. Why aren't you ventilating? They're too young to tunnel ventilate. I go, they're never too young to tunnel ventilate if they're hot. We don't want to see hot birds. House is 36 degrees. Birds are stressed. Look at the thermal image. Those birds are just glowing with heat. Increase the airspeed, put them in tunnel. Only 1.2 meters per second. Just a low airspeed. About 1.5 meters per second. That was all that was needed to drop their body temperatures. Get rid of the inlets, switch to tunnel, not with every tunnel fan, but only about 1 to 1.5 meters per second. And that's what we see You can tunnel ventilate birds during the first third of the flock, but all you're going to need is about a third of your tunnel fans and airspeed of maybe 1.5 meters per second. That's going to be enough to keep them comfortable. Let's not waste energy by turning on a bunch of fans. So, the first third, there's your target. Your fan capacity is somewhere between 18 and 55, basically 33% of your tunnel fans, and an airspeed of 1 meter per second. Those are the two things you want during the first third of the flock. What about moderate age birds? Increased heat production, better feathered birds. But there's still a fair amount of space between them. So we don't need to go every single tunnel fan. Let's look at some research conducted at Mississippi State to give us an idea about the airspeed we need at each production phase. What they looked at, 25 degrees at night, 30 degrees during the day, from 21 to 56 days. Why did they start at 21? Because they saw the same thing we did. That of those young birds, all they need is an airspeed of about 1.5 meters per second. They're fine. But they're really more interested with the older birds. They looked at still air, 2 meters per second and 3 meters per second. Here's your weekly weight gain per week. And all you need to look at is during week 4 and 5, which in this case was the middle third, there was no difference in performance whether they had 2 or 3 meters per second. There was a difference the last third between 2 and 3 meters per second. What does that sort of tell you? During the middle third, based on this research, we're seeing that we don't get extra weight gain with those higher airspeeds, so why provide it? Again, not much of a difference between 2 and 3 meters per second, much bigger difference in weekly weight gain at the last third of the flock. Feed conversions, not much of a difference. Weeks 4 and 5, that middle third. But during the last third, what really changes the last third of the flock? Density, pounds per square meter, minimal space between them. And that's what this research showed. Same thing. So, here we are. During the second third, we need to be about using 66% of our tunnel fans and airspeed between 1.5 and 2.5 meters per second. Judgment call. During the final third, we're looking at using all of our tunnel fans at about 3 to 4 meters per second. When should all the tunnel fans be operating? Tunnel fans in the house should all be operating by the time you're 5.5, 7 degrees above your target, period. What does that look like? That right there. We have staging of our fans in inlet mode. We switch to tunnel, and we stage them up with the last fans coming on 5.5 to 7 degrees above our target. And then we're in full tunnel at 25.5 degrees C if your target is 20 degrees. When should evaporative cooling pads be used? Evaporative cooling pads should be operating after all the tunnel fans are operating for that age of bird. But all the tunnel fans, again, will vary with bird age. Second thing is, we generally, in humid climates, do not want to turn our pads on before 29 degrees. If the house is 29 degrees, and if we have the right airspeed, we don't need the evaporative cooling. The more airspeed we have, the less we need evaporative cooling, and the better your life will be. Because as soon as you turn on that pad, where's the humidity going to happen for 90% of you in this room? It's going to go between 80 and 90%. Say, I want it lower. Well, move your houses to a different country, because the fact is, all of you are in a climate that you are going to see humidities as soon as you turn on those pads between 80 and 90%. Because the fact is, in humid climates, temperature and humidity cross over at about 27 degrees C and 80% humidity. That means whenever the temperature is below 27 degrees C, your humidity is above 80%. Whenever your temperature is above 27 degrees, 28 degrees, your humidity will be below 80%. If we turn on our evaporative cooling, when the humidity is 70 or 80% outside, you're going to push that air to saturation. Let's wait for it to sort of get hotter and a little drier, then turn on your evaporative cooling. So again, that's what we're looking at. So the evaporative cooling comes on at about 29 degrees, off at 28.5. A lot of information here. I do realize that. You'll get the slides so you can look at it in more detail later on. So 29 degrees C, the pads come on. What about younger birds? We're not going to use all the fans, but we're going to use our evaporative cooling. Now the evaporative cooling will come on a little bit higher temperature because they're more heat tolerant. So the pads might come on at 31 degrees during that second third of the flock. We're going to wet maybe just half the pad. I'm big into that. The pad should be split into two sections. So you have two levels of pad cooling. When it's sort of hot, you turn on the first half of the pads on each end of the house. Get you a little bit of cooling. What about the first third? We're going to use evaporative cooling if it gets hot enough. We're going to use 33% of our fans. We're going to have an airspeed about 1 and 1.5 meters per second. And then if the birds are still hot, are we going to turn on more fans? No. We're going to turn on half of the pad and just put a little water on the pad. Because we don't want to get that house really, really wet. Nighttime operation, this is what it's all about. I could speak 3 hours on this subject. During the day, we're keeping birds alive. At night is when you get improved performance. You're supposed to maintain during the last third of the flock. There's no such thing as power savings during hot and humid weather. You're going to turn on every single fan and let them run 24 hours a day. Because that's what's going to be required to keep those birds cool. Because the fact is, as the temperature goes down at night, the humidity goes up. They go, oh, great, the temperature's 25 degrees outside. But the humidity's 100% for most of you. So even though it feels cooler to you, it doesn't feel cooler to the birds. Because they are very sensitive to humidity. So, even though the nighttime temperatures would be between 23 and 25 degrees, the humidity tends to run 90% and higher. And 23 degrees, 90% humidity, you can kill a bird pretty quickly if you're not moving enough air over the bird. And even if you don't kill it, you're not going to get enough performance out of the bird. Because the fact of the matter is, at 25 degrees C, you can write this one down. At 25 degrees C, increasing the humidity just from 50 to 70% feels the same as the birds as a 5-degree temperature increase. So at 25 degrees and 50% humidity, the birds say it's 25 degrees. But at 25 degrees and 70% humidity, the birds feel like it's 30 degrees C. If the humidity is 90%, you know what they feel like? The temperature is about 31, 32 degrees C. So just because the thermometer says it's cool, doesn't mean the birds feel that it's cool. The fact is, when you look at the bird's ability to lose heat, as long as the humidity is below about 85%, they do pretty well. But as soon as that humidity goes above 85%, it really harms birds. So again, to minimize offset the negative effects of high nighttime temperature and humidity, we need to maintain that airspeed both night and day. Here's a study. 6 minutes. Had groups of birds. Again, 25 degrees during the night, 30 degrees C during the day. Looked at birds with still air. That's about 1.75 to 1.5 meters per second and about 2.25 meters per second. The point is, when we're looking at fan power, we had a group of birds that had still air. One had high airspeed at night, during the day, and low airspeed at night. One had high airspeed 24 hours a day. Let's look at the difference in weight gain. From day 37 to 44, these birds had the highest weight gain when they had the high airspeed 24 hours a day. Next week, same thing. More airspeed resulted in higher weight gain. During both of them, it was 32 degrees and an airspeed of 550 feet per minute. But at night, the only difference between these two birds is what happened at night. And the birds that had the higher airspeed had the highest weight gains. Feed conversions, same thing. The birds that had the best feed conversions and weight gains. Both houses were the same during the day. The only difference was at night. And we got better weight gains and feed conversions by running the fans at night. Last point. Beware of turning your lights off at night. We did studies on 10 different broiler farms during the last week of the flocks. We measured inside, outside temperature, outside humidity, water consumption, air velocity, and we also monitored bird body temperatures. So what we did is went to commercial farms, took about 10 birds off of each farm, implanted a temperature sensor, painted them nice bright colors, and put them back in the house and waited to see what happened. And the thing that we saw time and time again was this. The black line is the water consumption. When the water goes to zero, this is a 2-day period, when the water goes to zero, what does that mean? The lights went off. So this is the last third of the flock, the last week or so. When the lights went off, the pink line is body temperature. Body temperatures went up every time. The body temperatures at night, even though it was cooler and all that, the body temperatures at night were often the same or higher than they were during the day. Because what happens? As soon as that bird sits down at night, boom, they're sitting on bedding material that's sort of insulated, and the only place they're going to lose heat is off their backs. As long as they're sort of up a little bit and moving around, they're fine. But when the lights went off, 4-hour period, 6-hour dark period, every night their body temperatures went up. So, younger birds, they need a dark period. Yes, during the first third and second third of the flock, they need a dark period because a dark period actually makes them healthier and you get better weight gains and performance. But during periods of high heat stress, hot and humid climates, not as much in hot and dry, we need to make sure you probably shouldn't be shutting the fans off the last 7 or 10 days of the flock when your density is the highest and heat stress is going to be the biggest problem. So everything you needed to ever learn about hot weather ventilation in 180 slides and 58 minutes. That's a new record for me. You're just getting a glimpse of hot weather ventilation. And that's the trick, is we have our workshop every year that's 2.5 days that we talk about hot weather ventilation. And no,